But most importantly of all, what's being set up is, I think, Isagi's first major loss in the Neo-Egoist League arc. There's a lot to suggest that it won't end well for Isagi and his teammates. This alone suggests that Isagi is fated for a monumental loss here as well.
Hello, my name is Sean, and I have lost all credibility. During the Usurps match, a prevailing sentiment among the fandom was that it would be better for the story, whatever that would mean, if the Usurps were to win. And to be perfectly clear, this was also my view for the better part of the match. You could go back to some of my older videos if you want to hear my reasons and arguments at the time. But in the end, of course, the Usurps didn't win. So where does that leave us? Has Blue Lock's writer Muneyuki Kaneshiro dropped the ball for the third match of the Neo-Egoist League? Or was there something that all these people on the internet had been overlooking? Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I've come to believe that we really were missing the bigger picture. During the final chapters, the pieces suddenly clicked together for me. That there is actually a lot more to the Usurps match than meets the eye. And that a BM victory is actually a crucial component for its overall themes and ideas. The Usurps match is a story about kings and followers. About spectacular solo feats and breathtaking teamwork. And about the rise of two strikers who will turn the most far-fetched dreams into reality. So buckle up, because I'm about to offer you my full analysis of the most misunderstood match in all of Blue Lock. The match where a clown was reborn as a king. I hope that went well. Okay, well, whatever. To make sense of the Usurps match, we need to examine it within the wider context of the Neo-Egoist League. This arc's central conflict is the rivalry between protagonist Yoichi Isagi and Germany's rising star Michael Kaiser. Kaiser explicitly frames their rivalry as a struggle for power by casting himself and Isagi as two kings vying for dominance within their team. So then we reach the end of the Manshine match, where Isagi manages to close the gap between himself and Kaiser. And with that, Kaiser finally acknowledges that Isagi has the makings of a ruler, and challenges him as an equal. In the next match, they will compete over who can score the most goals, as proper strikers. So with that, the Usurps match is the battleground where they will settle their score for good, and thereby determine which of them is the rightful king of Bastard München. To put it differently, Isagi's challenge in the first half of the NEL is to compete on a professional level at all. But now, in the third match, Isagi must ascend to higher realms of egoism. His new challenge is to become the nucleus of his entire team as an unabashed egoist striker. And that brings us to the central concern of the Usurps match. This match is really an examination of the qualities that make up a rightful king. Now, that brings us to the opposing team, which is spearheaded by a character who could not have been more suitably chosen for this stage of the story. It's the player who has been associated with kingship since Blue Lock's earliest chapters. And so, leading up to this match, the manga really doubled down on the hype for Shouei Barou. Barou is unveiled as the highest ranking Blue Lock player and the top scorer in the entire NEL. and he's chomping at the bit to face off against Isagi. So these are the stakes that Blue Lock establishes at the start of the Ubers match. To become the true king of Bayern München, Isagi must surpass 2 rulers. The next Gen 11 superstar, whose very name is German for emperor, and the undisputed king of Blue Lock. And more than that, the match is explicitly cast in terms of kingship at various critical junctions. At its very onset, it's framed as a contest for the throne, and going into the final kickoff, the 3 strikers are presented as contenders for the title of king. As an aside, the whole royalty naming scheme even goes a step further. After all, the previous match sees Isagi coming out on top against the world's number 2, the aptly named Chris Prince. So, from a progression standpoint, it's highly fitting that Isagi overcomes a prince before he faces off against kings and emperors. Anyways, before we turn to Isagi, I first want to discuss Barou's arc in this match. Now, I know that I just called Barou the undisputed king of Blue Lock, but his journey has been a bit more complicated, a bit more tumultuous than that. Barou already established his presence in the first selection, and back then his claims to kingship were certainly not empty boasting. After all, he single-handedly united a fragmented team with his overwhelming skills and charisma. But then we reach the second selection, and the tables have turned completely on him. Barou's self-centered attitude made him into a massive detriment to his teammates. Eventually, even Barou has to admit that he is not a king in his current state. Now, that match, of course, ends with a major redemption for Barou, but there is a noteworthy caveat here. Barou is redeemed as a player, not as a leader. He transformed himself from a king into a villain, which in practical terms meant that he gravitated around Isagi rather than having others gravitate around him. And this remains the case in the U20 match. Here too, Barou throws the playing field into disarray with his obsessive focus on devouring Isagi. He's an agent of chaos, not a captain who commands the respect of his teammates. So this brings us to Barou's role in the Ubers match. As I noted before, Isagi's challenge at this point of the story is to cement himself as the king of BM. And what's absolutely fascinating is that Barou, Isagi's greatest roadblock, goes through a parallel development in the same match. After a long and arduous journey, this match marks the moment where Shouei Barou finally establishes himself as a true rightful king. Let me explain why. Throughout the manga, Barou is repeatedly made to choose between 2 paths, between taking the easy way out or staying true to his impossibly lofty ideals of kingship. I discuss this in more detail in my video on Barou and Snuffy, so definitely check that out later if you're interested. Either way, this pattern plays out again in the Neo-Egoist League. Upon joining the Ubers, his new coach dangles the most delectable carrot in front of him. Marc Snuffy offers Barou the title of king on a silver platter. All he has to do is subscribe to Snuffy's philosophy of treating football as work. And yet, Barou resolutely looks a gifted crown in the mouth. But while his teammates are baffled by this decision, this is perfectly understandable from Barou's perspective. After all, he has long understood that being a king is about much more than just scoring the most goals. A true king is someone who rallies others behind him and by doing so paves a path to victory. In other words, Barou knows that he wouldn't command the respect of his teammates if he didn't earn his stripes through his actions. Now, Barou does of course eventually give Snuffy a chance, and accepts a philosophy that treats football as a job. But interestingly enough, this Barou has not yet proven himself as the sole ruler of the Ubers. At least from the outside, the Italian team relies on a system with two complementary kings. Barou as the top striker, and Snuffy's protege, Don Lorenzo, in charge of defense and playmaking. But as the match progresses, and Isagi repeatedly foils Barou's efforts, Barou's frustrations eventually boil over. He figuratively submits his letter of resignation, effectively refusing to work with Snuffy's predetermined tactics any longer. Instead, he usurps the team from within. And his reasoning for this is telling. Snuffy's system is an outstanding environment for mediocre players, but mediocrity is not good enough for Barou's lofty ambitions. If he wants to shoot for the moon, he must carve out an untrodden path for himself. That's what it means to strive for kingship. And Barou's gamble pays off big time, with one of the most breathtaking goals in the entire series. So all in all, Barou took the reins of his team in hand, moved his teammates to play in accordance with his will, and proved his worth to the world of football. At this moment, Barou has displayed all the qualities that make up a true king. And as a result, everyone on the field finally acknowledges him as the true king of the Ubers. But there's another dimension to Barou coming into his own as a king. One that we see in the final part of the match. Back when Barou had initially rejected Snuffy's offer, he justifies his decision with the claim that he only serves himself. And this is very much in keeping with all that we've seen of Barou so far. In the ideal world of one of Blue Lock's most egregious egoists, all his teammates would offer themselves up to let Barou score the goals. But after Barou has been acknowledged as the king of the Ubers, his playstyle changes accordingly. He's no longer a predator lurking in the shadows, but starts playing a more active role within his team. The new King Barou puts pressure on his opponents, and even jumps in to plug holes in his team's defense. In other words, his ascendance as head of the team is accompanied by a newfound sense of responsibility. And at the same time, Barou's rise propels the Ubers to hitherto unforeseen heights. The ruler's selfish hunger for glory simultaneously brings out the best that his teammates have to offer. We can actually trace Barou's ascent to the throne of the Ubers through a series of visual metaphors that have been steadily accumulating since the second selection. In their first scene after their pivotal 3v3 match, Isagi meets Barou in the canteen, where Barou is chomping down on a steak. And remember, back then, steaks were a potential reward for scoring goals. So Barou's dinner is direct evidence of his achievement in his previous match. But at the same time, this savory feast is used to visualize the claims of Blue Lock's resident carnivore. Barou swears that he will devour Isagi, just like how he is devouring his steak. And in the next match, Barou follows through on this promise. From the thicket emerges the King of Blue Lock, like a ferocious lion, patiently staking out his unsuspecting prey. Now, many readers have already picked up on a surface level meaning of Barou's leonine aura. Barou is equated to a lion because the lion is the king of beasts. But if you look more closely at the scene where Barou is first associated with lions, that is actually not the main point of comparison. Barou is a lion because his animal counterpart is the ultimate carnivore, the only creature that can match Barou's voracious hunger for goals. In other words, Barou becomes a lion when he devours other players, just like how he devoured the steak after his previous match. That brings us to the Neo-Egoist League, and to Don Lorenzo in particular. Lorenzo offers us Blue Lock's greatest rags to riches story. He grew up in absolute poverty, but when he lay on the brink of death, he had an encounter that would change his life forever. Snuffy offered the destitute boy riches beyond his wildest imagination, and he put his money where his mouth is by replacing Lorenzo's rotten teeth with a pair of golden dentures. So, for Lorenzo, these golden teeth represent his second chance at life. That's why he got a tattoo of a mouth on his neck, and why he and his teammates get surrounded by this mouth-like visualization when they change the tides of the game. But at the same time, Lorenzo's golden teeth are also the truest testimony for Snuffy's brand of leadership. He's a loyal coach who never abandons his players, and a reliable executive who takes full responsibility for his employees' failings. But as the match progresses, Barou gradually subsumes the symbol of the bond between Snuffy and Lorenzo. During his training with Snuffy, Barou is taught how to fulfill his role as the team's resident predator more effectively. And so, once the King of Blue Lock scores his first goal, he too manifests Lorenzo's mouth, all to communicate that this goal was brought about by a fusion of Barou's feral instincts and Snuffy's tactics. But once Barou usurps the team, the Uber's mouths are fully interwoven with Barou's pre-existing lion imagery. And strangely enough, this turns out to be a match made in heaven. After all, there is simply no better visualization for Barou's insatiable hunger for goals than a literal mouth that consumes all in its path. The majestic lion has fully devoured his team, but in a way that brings out the best it has to offer. And with that, Barou is crowned as the rightful king of the Ubers. Now, I realize that I've been talking about Barou for, quite a while now, but I ask you to indulge me in a brief excursus into the realm of philosophy to round this off. In some of my earlier videos, I touched on how Barou's first appearance is heavily inspired by the work of the 18th century political philosopher Thomas Hobbes. In Leviathan, which is Hobbes's seminal work on political theory, he claims that the natural condition of human beings is a so-called state of nature, where anarchy reigns supreme and might makes right. This terrifying situation only comes to a close when humans form societies through social contracts, and in particular by the establishment of a powerful, absolute monarchy. Now, in my view, Hobbes's genealogy of political systems is a really important source for the more politically tinged sections of Blue Lock. In the first selection, Jinpachi Ego creates an environment where all preconceived notions about football are cast to the winds, and as a result, the playing field turns into a complete free-for-all. Basically, the Blue Lock candidates enter a Hobbesian state of nature. This anarchy only comes to a close when one player rises to the top within the chaos and proclaims himself king. And by doing so, his teammates rally around him and thereby come together as a functional political entity under the banner of Shouei Barou, the Hobbesian autocrats. So then we reach the Ubers match, where Barou finally re-establishes himself as a rightful king. One of the most notable contrasts between its two competing teams is their coach's approach to leadership. BM's Noel Noah grants his players a massive amount of freedom, with the only stipulation that they justify their playstyle with quantifiable results. Snuffy, on the other hand, employs a top-down approach. He devises strategies for his players and takes responsibility for their victories and losses. In short, this giant of Italian football is the figurative head of the team, and his players the limbs that execute his designs. Now, Snuffy's comparison of himself and his players to a head and body is really interesting because the analogy between the human body and the state has been a popular metaphor in political theory across the ages. The basic point of this comparison is that both are comprised of disparate parts that form a greater harmonious whole. A human body is made up of a variety of limbs that each have their own function, and a state by its citizens or various social groups with unique societal roles. So with this markedly political imagery, the manga already signals that this match explores issues of social order, hierarchy, and leadership. But more specifically, the metaphor of the state as a body played a prominent role in Hobbesian thought. Just look at this frontispiece of Hobbes's Leviathan. At the top, it depicts the king, whose very body is made up of the citizens over whom he reigns. In Hobbes's view, the formation of political bodies is analogous to God creating the physical bodies of humankind. As Dr. Catherine Attier writes, God may be the artist of man, but man is the artist of the state. Through the art of constructing the commonwealth, men lift themselves out of the condition of mere nature. In other words, the establishments of political entities that mirror the human body demarcates the transition from chaos to order, from the state of nature to human society. Now, apologies for dumping all this philosophy into a video about a Japanese football comic, but I hope I'll be able to make it clear why this is relevant to the Ubers match. Basically, when Snuffy presents himself as the figurative head of his team, he is in a sense casting himself as a Hobbesian monarch. He's the mastermind who transformed a bunch of unruly football players into a highly coordinated unit. And note here how Snuffy has instilled an almost military discipline within his players. So Snuffy is basically this civilizing force for Ubers. But once Barou accepts his position as King of Ubers, Snuffy explicitly entrusts the limbs of the Uber's body to his new protege. Right here, we witness a transfer of power from one monarch to another. Yet, in the first half of the match, this process is still incomplete. It's only after Barou takes control of the team that he fully comes into his own as a figurative head of state. After all, that's the moment when he finally starts referring to his teammates as his limbs. But what's especially remarkable about all this is how Barou's progression in the story can be mapped onto Hobbes's ideas about the emergence of societies. We've gone from the first selection, where Barou's sheer prowess gave rise to tentative social contracts within his team, to the Ubers match, in which he is fully accepted as the head of a figurative political body. And more than that, the Ubers system perfectly embodies Hobbes's belief that order comes about through absolute top-down rule. In Hobbes's own words, the only way to ensure safety and prosperity for a peoples is to confer all their power and strength upon one man or one assembly of men, that may reduce all their wills by the plurality of voices unto one will. This is the generation of the great Leviathan, or rather, to speak more reverently, of that mortal god to whom we owe our peace and defense. To put it differently, Hobbes reimagines the eponymous Leviathan, which was originally a biblical monster, as a sovereign king who in his single person enacts the wills of his people. And all that is shockingly similar to how Blue Lock depicts the Ubers. By now, we're far removed from the state of nature. This is a team that revolves around absolute obedience to its king, and that is reflected by its highly orderly, coordinated playstyle. Its individual players are subsumed into a greater whole, visualized as this monstrous entity, a creature that is at the beck and call of its rightful ruler, the mighty Leviathan. And that's why Shouei Barou is the greatest character in all of fiction. Right, so I may have gotten a bit off topic there. So let's return to Isagi and his journey to win the throne of Bastard München. By the end of the Mannschein match, Isagi had gained the necessary skills to contend for the top in earnest. That's brought out in particular in chapter 208, where he showcases his abilities in rapid succession. Off-the-ball movement, direct shots, metavision, reflexive play, all of which leading up to his realization that he needs to learn how to shoot with his left leg. So when Isagi at last scores his first goal in the Neo-Egoist League, it's a testament to his individual growth over the course of the arc. This is the evidence that he's reached the level where he can lay claim to the throne in the first place. But as the match progresses, the Ubers team catches up to Isagi's skill set. Ikki Nico and comrade Oliver Aiku unveil their own aptitude for metavision, to the point that Aiku completely shuts down Isagi's abilities. The point is clear. Despite all of Isagi's growth, this team will not allow Isagi to muscle his way to the goal any further. And in addition, Kaiser's spectacular bicycle kick goal proves once and for all that the Emperor still reigns supreme in terms of physical prowess. But here's the thing. An impressive shot alone does not maketh a king. Instead, Blue Lock puts more and more emphasis on a different aspect of Isagi's development as the Uber's match progresses. BM's eventual victory does not come about through Isagi's individual skills, but rather through him coming into his own as a leader. To put Isagi's leadership arc in context, I first want to zoom out a bit and consider the development of BM over the course of the Neo-Egoist League arc. At its beginning, we're introduced to the hyper-efficient, well-oiled machine that is the original Bastard München. However, if Isagi wants to make a name for himself, he must disrupt that very system. And that he does. But as a result, the team as a whole has become fragmented and disjointed, and rife with internal strife. So, where the first half of the arc is about Isagi smashing an existing system to pieces, its third match sees him rebuilding the team from the ashes. Let me start with a short example of this. Around the middle of the match, the German team is in total disarray at the hand of Snuffy's relentless coordinated assaults. BM's disoriented players lack direction and threaten to fall apart completely. Right now, the team is in urgent need of guidance, and even their coach doesn't have any meaningful strategies to weather the situation. And that's exactly when Yoichi Isagi steps up. He instructs Raichi to simply limit Snuffy's options. And by doing so, he allows them to slowly regain control of the playing field. In other words, Isagi displayed stellar leadership at a critical junction, and with that, BM prevented a potentially devastating goal. Isagi's leadership talents are also foregrounded by Hiori in the last play of the match. According to Hiori, Isagi has offered his team a guiding light, and they respond in kind by finally coming together as a unified whole. And this is all the more impressive given the histories of all the characters who join in to stop the Uber's final push. We've got Yukimiya, who originally rejected Isagi's methods and wasted opportunities by refusing to face reality. Then we've got Raichi, who was once Isagi's staunchest critic, but now pledges allegiance to BM's newfound king and offers himself up in service of Isagi. And finally, we even see Kunigami, the disruptive wildcard who refused to cooperate with his teammates until this very moment. In short, all of them are characters who have called Isagi's abilities or decisions into doubt. And yet, now they voluntarily pave the way to victory through Isagi's goals. In fact, Isagi's accomplishments as a leader form a direct contrast to the conduct of BM's previous regents. It's clear that Michael Kaiser must have also once earned the loyalty of his teammates and led them to support his goals. But since his arrival in Japan, Kaiser has only fostered infighting and dissent. He endeavors to tear his rivals down rather than pulling them up, like Isagi has been doing since the Manshine match. That, finally, brings us to Yo Hiori, whose arc offers the greatest testament to Isagi's qualities as a king. In the final leg of the match, BM has to sub in a new player. And for the first time, Isagi steps up to advocate for a specific substitution. Where his only concern at the start of the arc was getting to play at all, Isagi, as hopeful claimant to the throne, is now looking at the bigger picture and identifying the best path to victory. More specifically, he's refiguring the team in his own image. Just like how the original Bastard München revolved entirely around the talents of Michael Kaiser. And notably, this scene takes place right after Barou has completely surpassed Isagi. With his previous goal, Barou took control of the field by asserting himself as a rightful king. So, if Isagi wants to overcome Barou, he has to prove that he too can come into his own as a leader. And that segues directly into the Hiori storyline. At the start of the match, we're shown how Hiori is struggling with his place in Blue Lock. Back when he was a child, Hiori's parents forced their failed dreams onto their son. And as a result of their expectations, he came to despise football. The thing is, Hiori is brimming with raw talent, but he's held back by his lack of motivation. But as the match progresses, and Isagi exceeds expectations time and again, Hiori finds himself yearning to play. And then, when he's finally called to the field, Hiori notices that he has expectations for himself for the first time in his life. Now, it's not very subtle that the theme of dealing with the expectations of others is a key element in Hiori's character arc. But before I dive into the weeds, I want to set out the bigger picture here. Up to this point, the Usurps match has mainly been focusing on the characters who come into their own as kings. But with Hiori, Blue Lock shows us the other side of the coin. Through him, the manga offers us the point of view of a follower. More specifically, it showcases that a true king can rise to even greater heights through the efforts of those they inspire with their leadership. Once again, this quality has already been displayed on the other side of the playing field. Barou deviated from the playbook, but he did so with the full confidence of his teammates. Where a lesser leader going off the rails might have thrown his team into disarray, the Usurps players are enthralled by Barou's presence and shift the tides of the match as a result. Now, what's interesting about Hiori in the context of kingship is that he has been subjected to a variety of different leadership styles. That is essentially what he means when he talks about the expectations placed upon him. Growing up, Hiori's entire life revolved around following the directions of his parents. That came to a head when a young Hiori discovers that his parents were literally charting his entire life's course behind his back. But what his parents didn't realize is that their dictatorial approach to coaching is actually harming Hiori's prospects in the long term. They've gotten a son with extraordinary talents in their hands, and yet their efforts have stamped out his every drive to reach his full potential. And in light of Blue Lock's overall worldview, this outcome seems inevitable. After all, this is a manga in which only the greatest egoists can become world-class strikers. So by taking away their son's freedom to pursue his own interests, they've effectively condemned him to the realm of mediocrity. In other words, Hiori's parents represent the worst approach to leadership within Blue Lock's philosophy. But where it gets even more interesting is in a scene towards the end of the match, where it turns out that Hiori is burdened with a second set of expectations as well. He's not only haunted by the specter of his parents, but also by the ghost of Jinpachi Ego. Now, the reason for this is simple. Hiori subbed in under the assumption that he'd finally found an intrinsic drive to play football. But in the middle of the match, he realizes that he's merely submitted himself to a new set of expectations. And more than that, these newfound expectations stand in direct opposition to everything he'd been taught at Blue Lock. After all, the entire purpose of the Blue Lock program is to produce self-centered strikers. But Hiori had just consigned himself to the status of a follower. What I find absolutely fascinating about this scene is that it's arguably the first time in the series that the manga explicitly complicates its central philosophy. Yes, there have been characters who slot into other positions than striker, but to this point there hasn't been any other moment where it's framed as a bad decision to follow Jinpachi Ego's lead. In this instance, however, Hiyori's sudden existential crisis arises exactly because he has absorbed Ego's teachings. For the first time, Hiyori experiences a desire to play, an awakening of his ego, if you will. Yet, during his time in Blue Lock, his only frame of reference for egoistic play have been its egoist strikers. And so, it's no wonder that he succumbs to the pressure to follow their example and aims for a goal himself. After all, that's the form of egoism that Daddy Ego had propagated all this time. Now, I'm the first to admit that it's extremely hard to pin down the exact nature of egoism that Blue Lock celebrates, and I definitely don't want to suggest that a true egoist striker would never support their teammates. But let me visit one scene that I find especially informative as a comparison to the Hiori situation. In the first half of the U20 match, Isagi and Rin start cooperating more closely than they'd initially practiced. But when asked if they consider themselves subservient to their teammates, they both emphatically state that their teamwork is only a means to secure a goal for themselves. And for Blue Lock's mastermind, this is the perfect answer for his team of egoists. So when Hiori stands on the crossroads of fate, he does exactly what Ego has taught him, what Ego expects of him: to cooperate with Isagi for the express purpose of scoring his own goals. But the problem is that this is not a mindset that suits Hiyori's ego, and by offering him only a restrictive model of egoism, Blue Lock has effectively failed Hiyori. In the Ubers match, Hiyori provides perhaps the most extensive glimpse into the psyche of an egoist follower. This starts off with Hiyori reflecting on Barou's kingly qualities, on his captivating selfishness that draws in those around him, and how these are the qualities that you need to become the world's greatest striker. And yet, it's hard not to see Hiyori's appraisal of Barou as indirect commentary on Isagi at the same time. After all, the very fact that Hiyori is on the playing field at all is evidence that Isagi had a very similar effect on him. More specifically, what made Hiyori's ego truly blossom is seeing Isagi's untapped potential. That Isagi has the makings of a king, but needs Hiyori to show his abilities to the world. In other words, if Isagi is a king, Hiyori is his Kingmaker. That's the true nature of Hiyori's ego. But as said, that is not a form of ego that Blue Lock has ever cultivated. And as a result, Hiyori falters under the pressure of conflicting expectations. And after failing to live up to the Blue Lock ethos, he takes this as confirmation that he wasn't meant to play football in the first place. In his view, he failed his parents and then failed Blue Lock as well. And so, Yo Hiori simply gives up. But that's of course when Yoichi Isagi rushes to his side and makes it crystal clear that he still expects great things from his buddy. Right here, we witness another decisive display of leadership from Isagi. When his subject is paralyzed by doubt, the king of Bastard München steps up and guides him forwards, all the way to the final goal. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this last play is the culmination of everything the Usurps match has been about. Over the past 30 chapters, we have seen Barou and Isagi evolve from egoist strikers to egoist kings. And so, Isagi doesn't score the decisive goal through his individual abilities, but rather by facilitating the awakening of his teammates. And it's highly significant how the final chapter of the match contrasts Isagi to BM's other claimant to the throne, where Isagi leads his entire team to unprecedented heights. Kaiser tries to smash this to bits with his egocentric solo plays. In other words, Isagi ends the match with the greatest display of teamwork in the series, whereas Kaiser finds himself in complete isolation. It's not just in terms of teamwork, however, that Isagi surpasses the other hopeful kings. This is actually something I gleaned from a terrific chapter analysis from fellow BlueTuber Bad Guy from There. What he brought to my attention was how the match begins with a strong emphasis on sight. There's Barou's new Predator Eye, and Nico and Aiku gaining Metavision, among other things. Only for it to conclude with Isagi and Hiori scoring the final goal without looking at each other at all. They paradoxically visualize more by seeing less. I've linked the video in the description below, so definitely go check out his content. This observation gets even more interesting though if you take into account its wider context. Back in the Manshine match, Isagi discovered how Kaiser always seemed to be one step ahead of him. He was making use of his peripheral vision to gain more information than anyone else. And once Isagi understood Kaiser's formula, he believed that he could reach the top of the football world if he managed to pull off the same visualization as Kaiser. And indeed, Isagi does close the gap between himself and his rival through his acquisition of Metavision. So then we reach the next phase, the match where Isagi and Kaiser will settle their differences once and for all. And in a match that highlights the different ways football players use their eyes, Kaiser displays his complete mastery of ocular techniques. From Metavision to Barou's Predator Eye, Kaiser is unrivaled in this regards. And that's what makes Isagi's final goal so poetic. When everyone on the field is obsessively following their line of sight, Isagi and Hiori definitively surpass Kaiser by transcending from the realm of sight to a world that is only limited by the scope of their imagination. Now there's one central motif that I still haven't shed light on yet, that of death and rebirth. Time and again, the Usurps match showcases that bringing the dead to life is the hallmark of a true king. The first instance of this is Snuffy's meeting with Lorenzo. Snuffy found Lorenzo lying on the brink of death, and he gave him a second chance at life. That's why, even in the present day, the ace who was raised from the dead is depicted as a zombie. And it's really important to note here that Barou only gives Snuffy's philosophy a chance after hearing Lorenzo's story. That's what makes him decide that Snuffy might be a leader worth following after all. But as it turns out, Snuffy himself never came to terms with the death of his best friend Mick. Ever since Mick passed away, the coach of the Ubers has been a ghost of his former self. Back in their glory days, Snuffy and Mick swore that they would never give up on their dreams, with Mick boldly proclaiming that he would rather die than fail to become the king of football. But after their fall from grace, Snuffy tells Mick that they have to compromise on their dreams. For Mick, this is a sign that something in Snuffy has died. And soon after Snuffy's figurative death, Mick makes the tragic decision to follow through on his vow. So then, when Barou surpasses Snuffy's designs and hijacks the Ubers from within, he also brings Snuffy back from the dead. He rekindles his coach's fire, and by doing so, Snuffy the Phoenix rises from the ashes. With that, the torch has been passed. Barou did to Snuffy what Snuffy did to Lorenzo, and that marks the moment where he emerges as the new king of the Ubers. That dynamic is paralleled on the German side as well. Isagi, inspiring Hiori, basically serves as the counterpart to Barou restoring Snuffy's dreams. Just like Snuffy and Lorenzo, Hiori is strongly associated with birth and death. Before entering Blue Lock, Hiori struggled with the question of why he was born. And significantly, he's pondering this issue while playing a zombie shooter. With that, the manga establishes a symbolic contrast between Hiori and Lorenzo. Where Lorenzo's zombie steps are a manifestation of him taking a second chance at life, Hiori mowing down zombies represents his refusal to do the same. He's shooting down any opportunity to rise from the dead himself, as it were. Hiori's concerns about the purpose of his life bubble up again when he succumbs to an existential crisis in the middle of the match. And so, Hiori resorts to an egoistic shot which will determine if he was born to play football once and for all. And with that, his failed goal seems to spell the death of his football career. In actuality, however, Hiori's true rebirth only happens afterwards, when Isagi reaches out and makes it clear that he still relies on Hiori. This rebirth also serves as the culmination of a final series of recurring imagery, that of light, and more specifically, the new dawn. In the flashback, where we see Mick and Snuffy proudly proclaiming their dreams, we see them driving off towards the rising sun. These were their glory days, where they were on a straight trajectory to reach beyond the horizons. And similarly, every time Hiori remembers his fateful encounter with Karas, we're shown a crow, or a karas in Japanese, basking in the light of the rising sun. In both instances, however, Snuffy and Hiori failed to seize the day, and so the break of dawn makes place for a protracted night. More than that, the use of light symbolism harkens way back to the second selection. When Isagi scores by manipulating Barou, he transforms the darkness Barou created on the playing field into light. And when Barou makes his comeback, he treads on a dark path and devours Isagi's light in turn. This association between Barou and darkness resurfaces again during the Uber's match. After all, Barou's second goal plunges the entire world into darkness. So now let's return to the moment where Isagi gives Hiori a second chance, which marks the true rebirth of Yo Hiori. And significantly, his fresh start is symbolized by rays of light bursting out from the spreads. It's the radiance of a new dawn, just like Karasu's crow flying towards the rising sun. Yet, this light represents something even greater than Hiori's rebirth. It's a proclamation that Isagi will change the football world forever, with a blinding burst of light that dispels Barou's darkness. Bayern München vs. Ubers is a story about the rise of two kings, whose leadership qualities have the power to bring the dead back to life. And at its very end, one of them comes out on top by promising an even greater feat of resurrection, the rebirth of Japanese football. That's what the Ubers match has been building up to all this time. One more thing before I let you go. This video actually marks a very special occasion for myself. It's my 1-year anniversary on YouTube. Last year, I sure didn't expect this to end up as a Blue Lock channel. To be honest, I'd only barely even started reading Blue Lock at that point. Back then, I made a commitment to myself to keep up the channel for a full year and see how I felt after that. So here I am, 1 year and 30 videos later, and what a ride it's been. I'm beyond thrilled that there are apparently over 500 strangers on the internet who apparently believe that my thoughts are worth engaging with. So, for everyone who supported me the past year, thank you so much. It has really kept me going. And don't worry, I've still got plenty ego juices in the tank, so I won't be stopping anytime soon. I'll talk to you later, guys.